Hello everyone and welcome to today's video where we will learn about the bones of the skull. The cranium, face bones, sutures, and bones in different views will be covered. The skull is divided into two parts, the brain case, also known as the neurocranium, and the facial skeleton, also known as the viscerocranium. The cranium is the bony structure that encloses and protects the brain. Anatomically, the cranium can be subdivided into two parts. Cranial roof, also known as the calvarium, is comprised of the frontal, occipital, and two parietal bones. Cranial base is comprised of the frontal, sphenoid, ethmoid, occipital, parietal, and temporal bones. The frontal bone is a flat bone located at the front of the skull. It forms the forehead, roof of the eye sockets, and the upper part of the nasal cavity. The occipital bone is a cranial bone located at the back of the skull. It forms the posterior part of the skull base and protects the cerebellum and brainstem. The parietal bones are a pair of flat, curved bones that form the upper sides and roof of the skull and are joined at the midline by the sagittal suture. The sphenoid bone is a complex bone located at the base of the skull, which helps to form the cranial floor, orbits, and nasal cavity, and houses the pituitary gland. The ethmoid bone is a small, delicate bone located in the skull between the eyes, which forms part of the nasal cavity and orbits, and contains numerous small air cells. The temporal bones are a pair of bones located at the sides and base of the skull. They house the ear canal and contribute to the jaw joint and skull base. The facial skeleton includes 14 facial bones that form our face. These bones include the maxilla, the mandible, the zygomatic bones, the nasal bones, the lacrimal bones, the palatine bones, inferior nasal conchae, and the vomer bone. The mandible is the lower jawbone and the only movable bone in the skull. It forms the chin and holds the lower teeth. The maxilla is a paired bone that forms the upper jaw and most of the hard palate. It also contributes to the orbit and nasal cavity. The zygomatic bones, commonly known as the cheekbones, form the prominence of the cheeks and contribute to the orbit. The nasal bones form the bridge of the nose and support the cartilages that shape the nostrils. The lacrimal bones are the smallest bones of the face and form part of the medial wall of the orbit, near the tear ducts. The palatine bones form the posterior part of the hard palate, the floor of the nasal cavity, and part of the orbit. Inferior nasal conchae. The inferior nasal conchae are paired bones that project into the nasal cavity and help humidify and filter incoming air. The vomer is a thin, single bone that forms the inferior part of the nasal septum, which separates the left and right nasal cavities. Cranial sutures are fibrous bands of tissue that connect the bones of the skull. The major sutures include sagittal suture between the two parietal bones, coronal suture between the frontal and parietal bones, lambdoid suture between the occipital and parietal bones, squamosal suture between the temporal and parietal bones. The bones of the skull can be viewed from different perspectives, including the superior, lateral, anterior, and inferior views. Superior view. Frontal bone. Parietal bones. An occipital bone. Lateral view. Frontal bone. Sphenoid bone. Zygomatic bone. Maxilla. Mandible. Nasal bone. Ethmoid bone. Parietal bone. An occipital bone. Anterior view. Frontal bone. Sphenoid bone. Zygomatic bone. Maxilla. Mandible. Nasal bones. Ethmoid bone. And lacrimal bones. Inferior view. Mandible. Maxilla. Palatine bones. Vomer. Sphenoid bone. Zygomatic bone. Temporal bone. Occipital bone. Thank you for watching our video on the anatomy of the skull. We hope that you found it informative and that it provided you with a better understanding of the bones of the cranium, facial skeleton, sutures, and different views of the skull. If you found this video helpful, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel for more educational content like this. And don't forget to hit the notification bell so you never miss a video. See you in the next one.